Hello and welcome everyone to this special event that is an RSA International Hour and a Reginar webinar at the same time. Today's topic is Inequalities in Knowledge Production and Challenges of Participation in International Research Collaborations in Central and Eastern Europe and beyond. My name is Péter Balogh and I'm the moderator of this event. Please let me say a few words about it before presenting today's speakers. The Regional Studies Association is the global and interdisciplinary network for urban and regional research, development, and policy. The RSA supports its members with the latest research, funding schemes, networking and publishing opportunities, and spaces to grow research and careers. Today's event is organized in partnership with the Institute for Regional Studies, a multi-local research institute in Hungary, and part of the Center for Economic and Regional Studies, itself part of the Hungarian Research Network. Reginar, then, is the English language webinar series of this institute, and its previous editions are available on YouTube and through the Reginar page on Facebook. Please note that this webinar is recorded and will be made available on the RSA website and app. Importantly, please put any questions in the Q&A box and not the chat box. Also, please use the hashtag RSA International to tweet about the event. Now a few words on the background of today's topic. Different EU programs have initiated and financed a multitude of international research collaborations over the past decades, which have generated fruitful cooperations between different partners across Europe, but also contributed to the reproduction of European inequalities of knowledge production by sustaining differences in positions and roles of participants in collaboration networks, especially in an East-West dimension. Hence, during the session, the following topics will be discussed: understanding inequalities of knowledge production faced and challenges of participation in international research collaborations from the viewpoint of an Eastern EU member state. Besides the East Central European view, providing insights on challenges in international research perceived from other, such as Southern or Western parts of Europe. Finally, assessing different angles of fragmentation of the European research area, and not just geographic ones, with special regard to disciplinary issues from the aspect of social sciences. This discussion is backed up by results of the EU Horizon Project SSH Center, that stands for Social Sciences and Humanities for Climate, Energy, and Transport Research Excellence. This aims at supporting a better representation of SSH research from across Europe, especially with the participation of Eastern and Southern EU members. Besides challenges raised, potential ways forward to cope with them will also be discussed. Today's event will host one presenter and two discussants. We will begin with a presentation by Gergely Tagai, Research Fellow at the Institute for Regional Studies. Gergely is a human geographer whose research focuses on processes of peripheralization, demographic challenges, and social-spatial inequalities at national and EU levels. His expertise lies in quantitative methods, GIS, as well as spatial theory. Gergely is currently studying inequalities in scientific knowledge production in Europe by analyzing challenges of participation in international research collaboration networks. Nice to have you here. Our first discussant is Violeta Cabello, who is postdoctoral researcher at the Basque Center for Climate Change in Bilbao, Spain. Her recent research focuses on methodological and practical challenges of transdisciplinarity in socially polarized and environmentally sensitive regions, with a focus on water governance in semi-arid lands of Southern Europe. As part of the SSH Center project, Violeta has contributed to gathering voices from Southern EU countries on the challenges and proposals of SSH researchers working on climate, energy, and mobility in particular. Nice to have you here. And last but certainly not least, our second discussant today is Foulds, Professor of Sustainability and Society at the Global Sustainability Institute of Anglia Ruskin University in the UK. He's an interdisciplinary environmental social scientist using critical social sciences to explore policy and governance interventions for sustainability. Chris has extensive experience in coordinating EU Horizon projects on the possibilities of social sciences and humanities insights in relation to European Green Deal ambitions. We're looking forward to their comments, but first, Gergely has the floor.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Peter. And I start my presentation right in the middle. When speaking about inequalities of knowledge production, I refer to academic knowledge production and to those forms of differences which are systemic in nature and less related to individual characteristics of capabilities of researchers. In my presentation, I would like to speak about the nature of these inequalities with some potential explanations. In my view, if we simply refer to measurable features, these might cover differences in production outputs like publications or patents, differences in impact, for example, the place of publication or the number of citations, and inequalities of participation in knowledge production, characterized by measures of research and development personnel and expenditures, or the participation in publication networks. And what I'm going to speak the most, participation in research collaborations. If we place Hungary or other Central and Eastern European countries on the map of European academic knowledge production, we can see the following patterns. Moderate or low performance compared to other European countries, both in terms of R&D expenditure, research personnel, patent applications, or publication outputs and impact. We can also find that beyond the EU members with the lowest population, usually countries from Central and Eastern Europe stand the end of these lines. We can pick other indicators related to academic knowledge production too, like those listed in this dashboard published by the European Commission. And we might see similar positions and differences. Overall, countries like Hungary can be considered only as a moderate innovator in the European knowledge space. This is somehow similar if we explore the participation characteristics of Hungary and other Central and Eastern European countries in European research collaboration networks and try to outline the basic features of these disparities. The first thing I want to mention is that these inequalities are not in line with the original goals of research programs initiated by the EU, but are inherent in nature. An important goal of the EU is to foster cooperations among member states to stimulate balanced territorial development and integration. The European Commission has launched several research programs for establishing and supporting EU policies, from which the most important ones are the framework programs of research and technological development. The broad goal, considering knowledge production of these programs, is related to securing positions of the European Union in global knowledge production by removing barriers to innovation and enhancing perspectives of collaborative innovation actions between public and private sectors. Research collaborations by these European initiatives are project-based, financed by national or international donor organizations, and formalized, developed with a focus on a specified topic with a defined time span, and financial resources allocated to fulfill specific objectives. Long-term experiences with the framework programs bear witness to unequal positions in collaboration networks, either related to participation in research projects or differences in the obtainment of financial resources. The main dividing line is, of course, between old and new members of the EU. Considering financial aspects, on the one hand, it can be highlighted that the latter only gained about 5% of financial resources in the latest framework programs, Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. There are also huge differences related to per capita EU financial contributions. On the other hand, this also means that Central and Eastern European countries, plus countries like Germany, France, or Italy, are basically net contributors to the program. While there are also typical winners of this division of resources, for example, the Benelux states, and Nordic and Mediterranean countries, or formerly the United Kingdom. There are also unequal positions and asymmetric power relations in collaboration networks. Comparing experiences from previous framework programs to the latest horizons, one can find that positions of already central actors have strengthened during the past periods, while participants with peripheral positions remain in their subordinate roles. Of course, the integration of Central and Eastern European countries into collaboration networks is slightly improving. But it's important to add that participants with peripheral positions do not usually cooperate with each other, and they are mainly linked to spaces of European knowledge production via connected to Western centers. If we pick the case of Hungary in Inequalities of H2020 and Horizon Europe initiatives, there are some key points to be highlighted considering the performance of the country. These are, for instance, the low share of gained EU contributions and the low participation rates in general, and even lower participation rates, for example, in ERC or Marie Curie actions. To interpret these positions in comparison with other countries in Europe and analyze disparities of European research collaborations, I made a quantitative and GIS-based investigation by using attributes of institutions participating in H2020 initiatives. By the end of the programming period, about 32,000 projects have started in the H2020 framework program, with 162,000 project participations and 39,000 individual participants. My analysis had a much more limited scope. I only took research and innovation actions in societal challenges pillar into considerations, which were started between 2014 and 2019. These covered a pool of more than 20,000 project participations and more than 8,000 individual participants. By using GIS tools, I made a descriptive analysis and mapped different attributes of institutions, projects, EU financial contributions, and coordination role. Firstly, I mapped the absolute spatial differences in the distribution of H2020 collaborations. On these maps, symbols represent the geographical distribution of location of H2020 participants and are proportional to the attributes investigated. For example, the number of participants, number of projects, coordination pairs, or the amount of EU contribution. As a general pattern, we can highlight the dominant role of European metropolises in spaces of European research collaborations. These EU capitals and other big cities like Brussels, Paris, Madrid, Barcelona, Rome, Milan, Vienna, Berlin, Munich, etc., host hundreds of institutions participating in European research collaborations. Besides, we might observe a thicker density and bigger weight of participants in Western Europe in general. While in other parts of Europe, like in Central and Eastern Europe, institutions only from capital cities and some smaller local centers seem to be able to join these international research networks. Differences in distribution are even more striking if we rely on attributes related to the coordinator role or the EU financial contribution to projects. The location of H2020 coordinators is usually limited to Western Europe and European metropolises, while we can barely find participants of research collaboration with a coordinator role in Central and Eastern Europe. Differences in the allocation of EU financial resources are also huge. While partners from the eastern side of Europe might also have a decent cut of EU contributions in absolute numbers, their share is incommensurable with Western institutions. These inequalities can be further explored by investigating relative positions in spaces of H2020 research collaborations. The representation of attributes in choropleth maps makes the comparison of investigated distributions more straightforward. Patterns of inequalities are similar to the previous case. There's a dominant position of Western European urban areas in the Atlantic core within the space of academic knowledge production in Europe. And centers in the periphery, for example, Mediterranean metropolises with periphery location within Europe, also stand out a little bit. While in Central and Eastern European countries, only capital city region might have more favorable positions. Per capita comparisons do not challenge these patterns either, but they highlight even more the central positions of different locations in spaces of research collaborations in Europe, like Western capitals and Atlantic urban areas. By comparing the spatial distribution of research collaborations attributes and the distribution of population, concentration processes generated by these research and innovation initiatives are even more visible by revealing those areas within the European countries which are the most connected to the networks of international knowledge production. they have much more H2020 participation density than their population density. This is the final figure from this analysis. And this sums up what I stated on spatial differences in the distribution of H2020 collaborations by representing the spatial concentration of H2020 resources. Based on the explored data, the mean center and the concentration of different attributes of H2020 research collaborations are clearly placed in Western Europe within a quite small circle. For instance, as visualized on this map, there's more EU contribution from H2020 initiatives allocated within the drawn circle than outside of it. And yet, this pattern is quite distorted since geographic and scientific positions might differ a lot. And there are quite a few centers of European research collaborations which are located in peripheral areas of Europe. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I see here systemic reasons behind the introduced inequalities of European research collaborations. Currently, I still have no detailed empirical evidence on it, but I intend to aim my further research at the exploration of potential structural conditions shaping these differences. For example, socioeconomic environment, economic power, academic geographical, geopolitical positions, the institutional background of participants, or different cultural practices. And to those network attributes, which might also represent position differences within collaboration networks. For the critical reading of the analyzed inequalities, I find various concepts quite useful, like post-colonial critics, which focus on asymmetric power relations between Western and non-Western countries, decolonization discourses that emphasize the role of socioeconomic inequalities and their institutional and economic background, and academic capitalism, which concept brings into focus the criticism of those neoliberal rationalities which drive academic institutions to compete for external resources. In the exploration of potential explanations of differences characterizing international research collaborations, the recognition of researcher perceptions is also quite important. In the SSA Center Horizon Europe project, on which we work together with my Discussant colleagues, one of our aims is to increase the visibility of social science and humanity disciplines and Southern and Central European countries in the European research community. Among other actions, we launched a survey among CEE and Southern European SSH researchers and asked questions about their experiences in joining international research collaboration networks. Here, I only highlight some results coming from the CE-based responses. When asked about the involvement in research projects, we found that being part of domestic cause or projects is overrepresented in Central and Eastern Europe. Several respondents led individual projects or participated in research as a part of a consortium. These experiences of Central and Eastern European researchers are either missing, considering the international arena, like individual calls, or in most cases, Central and Eastern European researchers just had a supporting role in a proposal or a project. Besides, more than half of the respondents found that overall, for them, it's difficult to join international consortia from Central and Eastern Europe. We also asked them to tell us why they think so. Those respondents who emphasized difficulties often refer to that CE topics are not interesting due to the domestic focus. They also refer to potential prejudice of Western partners, to their own lack of experience and less international acknowledgement. Among the reasons, bureaucracy, the lack of resources, the lack of institutional support, or poor networking opportunities were also highlighted. Others mentioned the level of competition or the limited capacities and dedicated time and lack of resources for writing proposals. Many of the respondents said that these difficulties affect SSH researchers from the Central and Eastern European countries even more compared to STEM researchers. Those who found no difficulty in joining international consortia emphasized their acknowledged expertise in certain fields, the encouraging calls for CE participants, and the existence of their long-time partner relations. Mixed opinions are also highlighted by stating that the situation is difficult, but improving. Others lack the opportunity to have a bigger part in coordination and criticized their somehow tokenized role, often following the internationality rule of research funding. So overall, we can acknowledge that it's basically difficult to participate in international knowledge production in the form of research collaborations from Central and Eastern Europe. But the reasons and researcher perception related to it are quite mixed. By recognizing these difficulties, what we researchers can do. My personal view is to work together from different parts of Europe and act in favor of challenging the status quo characterizing inequalities of knowledge production. As an action in the mentioned SSH Center project, we submitted a position statement to the European Commission in 2023. It was a joint work of Southern, Central, and Eastern European and Western researchers based on the mentioned survey, 2 workshops, participatory wording, co-authorship, etc. The main theme of this statement was how can social science and humanities be better supported in Southern and Central and Eastern Europe. We raised some challenges and formulated several recommendations both to research funders and research institutions. It has been translated into 11 languages, and those who are interested in it can find it via the following link, which is also in the chat. I will not recall here all the points of our position statement, just highlight those which are personally the most touching for me. I hope during the following discussion, we can provide a broader insight into this work. So one point I would like to speak about is one size doesn't fit all. It's about that Northern and Western European ways of conducting science and social science are not the only right ways. So we are encouraging research funders to increase the number of opportunities for critical, reflexive, and transformative research to bring together different ways of knowledge. For example, local traditional knowledge from Southern Europe or from Central and Eastern Europe. The other point is more addressed to our research institutions and is related to the strengthening of administrative capacity for funding, application, and grant management processes. We see an obvious lack of administrative capacity in Southern and Central and Eastern European research institutions, which places a heavy burden on researchers. We are administrators, project managers, and fundraisers and financial experts at the same time, which sometimes makes research activity itself quite difficult. That's why we are urging, for instance, the establishment of teams within research institutions with international experience in the administrative process of research projects. And with these 2 points, I also conclude my presentation and will stop here. And I hope we can continue with other interesting aspects of these questions in the following discussions. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Gergely, for a clear presentation and for sticking to the time schedule. May I now ask Violeta to contribute with her comments and experiences?
Yes, thank you very much, Peter, for the introduction, and Gergely for the fantastic presentation. And you've done a great work in exploring data and showing these disparities on a much, I think, deeper way that we went through with our survey on the SSH Center project. So thank you so much and congratulations. I have like 3 comments that mostly stem from the qualitative discussions we had in the workshops and the later production of this position statement from the SSH Center project. And these discussions were meant to kind of collectively analyze the quantitative evidence gathered in a survey to more than 100 researchers all over Europe. And we saw that some of these disparities are shared by Central and Eastern European countries and Southern European countries, and some of others are like slightly different. So I will start by pointed at something that might differ. That is something that surprised me indeed, that Southern European countries appear to have a very high rate of participation in European projects and European networks and publications. And but on the other hand, we have a very low rate of researcher employment. So analyzing this means that many of us rely on European calls as a way of sustaining our employees because our contracts are temporary. We discussed that maybe, I mean, this is obviously not the only reason, but this might be one of the reasons why there are many researchers applying for European projects and successful on it and successfully developing an international network, because it's a way of sustaining our own employment in a very precarious temporary situation. It's a way of compensating. In the position statement, we also talk about the triple marginalization. Now, I think this is something we share. So first of all, it's precarious conditions that in the South may express in temporality in the contracts, and maybe in Central and Eastern Europe is different. It does refer to lower salaries. This is something we can discuss. The second marginalization is social sciences and humanities versus STEM, especially working in technical fields like climate and energy. And the third one is the geographic one, South and Central Eastern Europe versus the North. And here, something we discussed that was very explicit in Southern countries was the mobility requirement. So in Southern Europe, if we don't do at least 2-year research stay in a Northern European country, you're not a good scientist. You're undervalued. You cannot compete in national calls. And I think this relates to institutional cultures of valuing researchers. And I wanted to ask you, what is your perception? And also maybe the audience can comment on their own countries, if you perceive this kind of institutional bias against our own talent. And finally, something that we also discussed was the diversity in themes that are relevant for, in our case, climate, energy, and mobility research that is not always acknowledged or reflected in European calls. So we spoke about, for instance, talking about climate, Mediterranean countries face extreme challenges related to extreme heat, waves, wildfires, migrations, low level of unemployment, inequalities. So we don't have like a specific calls like covering a diverse geographical scope, and this is sorry. Yeah. So my question is that you think this could be operationalized somehow, and if this could actually help, and if in the current funding schemes, this is something that is included in a way that that somehow maintains this subordinate role of Eastern and Southern as compared to Northern and Western, sorry. And I think something we talk about is that we are missing actually like this idea of learning from the South and from the Eastern realities. Last year, I attended a conference, a super interesting talk by a sociologist from the Czech Republic, Péter, and he made a comparison of household metabolism, so water use and energy use in Central and Eastern countries as compared to Western countries. And they systematically use way less resources at home. And this is a reality that is not well known, at least in my own research geography. So I think that pushing this idea of learning from Southern and Eastern Europe, and I found very interesting the focus on decolonial theory, and not only decoloniality in Europe regarding what is South and Eastern from Europe, but also within European boundaries. I think this is a promising lens for the future for looking at this. Thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you, Violeta. Gergely, would you like to react immediately to some of these comments? Okay. If you prefer taking them all together, then I'm now inviting Chris to provide his comments.
Thank you very much, Peter. And thanks indeed to Gergely for a really interesting presentation, and to the RSA for setting this up. It's really interesting, and I've almost got too many notes here that I'm not going to be able to run through them all. So perhaps we can chat afterwards, Gergely. But just to kind of obviously make it even more obvious, I suppose my reflections on this will sort of, I suppose, be a little bit more of a Western focus, being based in the UK, and maybe some of my reflections are based upon my research into research funding landscapes, and also as a coordinator of projects. And also, I did want to say that actually some of the comments that I've included here are a little bit more based on the consortium-based research as opposed to sort of individual ERC sorts of research. I also wanted to, and I'm going to put the link into the chat because I think it's quite a useful paper if people are interested in thinking more about this. But it's a paper written by Rachel Fishberg and colleagues. And I think actually it complements a lot of what Gergely had on one of his slides around critical readings of inequalities. And the paper is about where of EU social science collaborations, obviously geographic in focus, much like Gergely's wonderful maps, which I enjoyed seeing. And they use Cordis data, so essentially the EU's project information around who the partners are and how much money went where, as well as some ethnographic data. And they talked about something called the epistemic, so knowledge related, the epistemic status of nations. And this essentially argues that certain countries or continents, or potentially regions, I suppose, are considered more or less likely to produce scholarly knowledge that is of value or even is exportable or usable by certain communities. So I suppose at the heart of this, these prejudices that Gergely mentioned, issues of credibility, usability by non-academic actors. I suppose at the heart of it is things like, what constitutes good and robust evidence, and therefore where the sources of those evidence comes from. And this is only complicated further if we start to think about the epistemic status of disciplines and social science and humanities on top of this kind of layer of the geographic inequalities. I also, as you were talking, was wondering how this is complicated still yet further with research focusing so much on the societal challenges that you mentioned, because so much of our research is funded with this condition that they are useful for society in some way, but then how that use is kind of set up fundamentally within the funding calls directs us in certain ways, and therefore directs the sorts of partners that can deliver that. So it's almost kind of scripted in, if you like. I had maybe, well, Violeta's mentioned one of them, so I have 4 quick observations and then a few sort of related questions, and then sort of a closing comment, which I'll just quickly run through. Firstly, was around this concentration of research and innovation resourcing in and around Brussels. I mean, we've talked here around Western dominance, but actually kind of the dominance of the Brussels bubble, not just in the creation of these funding calls, like, all of these funding calls and the projects come from the policy need that is identified by Brussels. So it's a particular subset of Western. Of course, there are certain communities that are deemed more successful in responding to this, but the dominance of the Brussels bubble in setting the agenda, I wonder if there's something to say there. I also liked your point, Gergely, around tokenism. I'm often talking a lot around the tokenism of social science, but yes, the tokenism of a Central Eastern European partner, to have that coverage in the consortium, which I feel is what you were getting at, is really interesting. And I wonder if sometimes it's presented as an opportunity, but is actually a barrier. I also liked how you talked about science isn't just done in one way. But I suppose a question I had for you here was, are there boundaries here? Like, what's flexible, what's non-negotiable? I suppose there are certain things that, minimum expectations, and then certain other areas that we can be flexible on. And also, and then my final observation was, I noticed you talked a lot about the joining of established networks, around essentially that you seem to imply that the challenge was breaking down sort of institutionalized barriers. I suppose this comes back to this epistemic status that I began by talking about, the epistemic status of countries, but then there's disciplines, there's stakeholder types, there's all kind of these expectations associated with who you're engaging, and therefore why certain people are locked out. And a question I had for you on this, I mean, obviously we're asking too many questions, so feel free to selectively pick the ones that are most of interest. But I was interested in the distinction between a partner, being a partner, trying to access that network as a partner, versus going as a coordinator, because you mentioned how there's differences here. So kind of joining these networks, but in these different roles, and sort of in terms of timelines, what's achievable. And so my final thing, just to mention, which maybe I've been hinting at, and relates to the title of your really interesting webinar around knowledge production, and I suppose I'm interested in how how knowledge production is a chain of processes. It's not just what the researchers produce, but the process of knowledge production begins with the actors, the policymakers that set the agenda, the funding call managers, the evaluators, the NCPs that disseminate, all the people involved. I mentioned earlier around how funding calls script proposals and then projects. And so I'm interested in how can Central and Eastern Europe be involved, as you say, in collaboration, but collaboration across that chain of processes, at the member state levels and these sorts of things, as opposed to it just being in the end of the chain, which is where the research is done. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, both of you, for those engaging comments. So, Gergely, it is your chance to react.
Okay, thank you very much for these comments and reflections and questions. These are really in line with those thoughts which are in my mind around these broad topics. And just as, some reflections addressed to Violeta. So when making these charts and so on, I haven't get the opportunity to look into details a lot. So your comment was really helpful for me because I just focused on my narrow area from Hungary and Central and Eastern European countries, but it's a useful feedback that you see other aspects and other relationships which are related to your experiences from a Southern point of view. I also agree that the diversity of local topics are not always reflecting European calls, and that's why I think that the improvement of widening calls and other tools which are more integrate these aspects into the EU policymaking are more highlighted, but I don't know if this could be long-term form of operationalization. I think that this is a quite long-term process to get real results and not just short-term results, and that's why I'm not really in favor of this kind of positive discrimination, which I also already highlighted that I think the key is working together from different parts of Europe. Thank you for Chris too for these aspects raised, and I also agree and also raised some thoughts in me that it's also a question considering social sciences, that how they are useful for the society. I think STEM-related disciplines have more credibility from the general public in this sense, and sometimes, like in the case of Hungary, we can also face some kind of discreditation process related to these disciplines. So it's quite a challenging situation to prove that what we are doing is really useful, and not just prove it to ourselves, but prove it in general for policymakers and for the general public as well. Yes, just another reflection that that I mentioned, that it's easier from this Central and Eastern European countries to become a partner in the consortium, while there's not much Central and Eastern institutions led consortia in these initiatives. But I have the feeling that it's not, yes, it's of course not just about what we can do as partners from these parts of Europe, but it's I know that in many cases we would have the opportunity to do that, to step in, like raising an idea and have a coordination role, but in many cases our administrative background and our experience in coordinating projects makes us step back and became just partners, because it's easier, it's a more comfortable role. So it's two sides of a coin, I think. Why this is can be considered as a lack, but also a luck. I could say that. So that's my first thoughts to your reflections. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Gergely. May I just jump in with a quick question there? Have you seen any differences between natural and social sciences in terms of these inequalities of research funding being allocated? Some people assume that the language of sciences may be more universal than that of social sciences, but this is debatable, of course.
Yes, I have not put up any slides on that, but I just made a small detailed analysis in which I represented different calls within societal challenges pillar, which are related to transportation, which are related to agriculture, which are related to medicinal issues, and so on. And I think what I saw based on these data, that these differences also apply to this situation. So I haven't found that in the case of natural sciences would be more balanced in that way.
Yeah, they may need more funding also. Okay, so we've got one question in the Q&A box, and I'm encouraging other participants to post some as well. But so this one goes, in the context of neoliberal rationalities, how can researchers with different geographical positions work for a more equal distribution of financial resources? Under neoliberal rationalities and precarious working conditions, we, that is researchers both in the East and the West, are made to compete with each other for finite financial resources. So which agents and what strategies can you identify that question the status quo? And sorry, I forgot to mention that this question comes from Melinda Mihai. I think it might be a more general question on what sort of agency and strategies you identify so far, perhaps. Which question this current situation, or that can alter the current state of affairs, perhaps?
So I have not yet dig into the potential solutions to step out this situation, but I thought that the first step could be giving voice to these inequalities and raise that it's problematic. And what could be potential agents and strategies to question this? I don't know if we, at the first step, can give enough voice to be heard at the level of policymakers, at the level of national governments. Maybe some results can be obtained. For example, as Violeta highlighted, that the diversity of topics which are really important from Southern and the Central European aspects can be better represented in this way. And I hope that on the long run, this could be built in policy decisions related to knowledge production.
Okay, thank you very much. It just comes to mind, by the way, that maybe in your research project you could highlight some best practices or so, in addition to your excellent quantitative mappings. And yeah, and who knows, maybe there is some university by now in East Central Europe which has also set up an office in Brussels, as have several Western universities. Okay, Chris has signaled to me that he also has a word to say, so.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as just a small comment inspired by Gergely's response there and Melinda's great question. I really like Melinda's comment, phrasing rather, of neoliberal rationalities, and I think that, I don't know, without sounding too pessimistic, that the situation may be worsening in the sense of policymakers and society more widely's view on and expectations on the role of universities in society. Like, I think long gone are the days when we were seen as there to critique, challenge, blue skies thinking. Now we're there to increasingly help solve societal challenges as per how the funding calls are set up, to help drive employability of next generation. And this kind of pulls us towards certain disciplines, certain geographies, certain roles within society. So that kind of all ties into this kind of precarious working conditions, the role of capital. I think they're all kind of tied together within how universities are structured and resourced and sort of run within society. So obviously what you're mentioning there around how can we search for a more equal distribution, obviously the ideal would be, and there are some funding calls on smaller scales, or some universities that try and test this out, don't they, where they kind of internally allocate the same amount of resources to all individuals to stop everyone competing and battling for this. I remember this was something, Violeta, that your workshop talked a little bit about, but that does feel like a bit of a parallel universe at the moment compared to what's possible. So I completely agree with the sentiment of your question.
Oh, the growing share of knowledge production in non-academic institutions could actually be an interesting topic for another RSA event, but let's see about that. It's a particularly relevant association in the sense that it's trying to combine academia and policymakers, perhaps more than several other scientific networks. Anyway, is there perhaps anyone who would like to have a final word? I cannot see questions in the Q&A, but yeah, don't feel any pressure, but if any of you feels like there is a final word to be said before we wrap up. If not, then I thank really a lot for the presenter, Gergely, and the two excellent discussants, Violeta and Chris. And also huge thanks to the RSA for co-hosting this webinar with us, the Institute of Regional Studies in Hungary. Please don't forget to follow our English language webinar series. It's called Reginar, and you can find it on Facebook and on YouTube. And of course, also, if you haven't yet, then I'll start following RSA's excellent channels of communication as well. So many thanks today again for our presenters. Oh, I see someone has. Okay, and just a thank you from the side of the Lisa, the RSA. Many thanks for that. And also thanks to the audience, of course. So I hope you found this interesting. So don't forget to follow RSA and Reginar webinar series, and have a good rest of the day. All the best from us. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.